Good. Okay, now we're going to start the recording. Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. It's good to see you all here on this beautiful, beautiful Jacksonville day. Can't get any crisper and beautiful, refreshing. All right, it just opens up the mind and allows you to really think properly and to delve into Torah. It's really an awesome experience and a really beautiful thing. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore. You all know the way I like the weather, right? But that's not why you all joined for this class. So we're on page 82, page 60, day 16, this halacha and the next halacha, right, have a similarities. This halacha is different, and then the next two halachas have similarities. So let's focus on this halacha. The law is like this, and we've been talking about this idea, right, in the last couple of times, and every time there's a little nuance, all right, to this halacha. The question is, and you can go ahead and read it, but it's a practical question that happens so many times. Someone's a teacher in a school, and they're the 7th grade teacher or the 8th grade teacher. It doesn't make a difference. And you are now getting information from the teachers in the previous year regarding a student, which is normal. That's what a good school does. You get a little information, you know, what were their challenges and things like that. Now, you have several students who are disruptive, right? Okay, that makes sense. They're kids, all right? On one hand, you want to tell the 8th grade teacher, be aware of these students, right? Make sure they don't, right, sit together, right? Stop them from their tracks, right? Try to be, you know, proactive. But on the other hand, right, you wonder if you might be saying Lashon Hara. Is this considered Lashon Hara? So you're saying these kids are disruptive. They talk out of class when they're together, right? You know, it's really a bad deal. All right, so the question is, what are you allowed to say? What are you not allowed to say? And is it considered Lashon Hara or not? You are saying something negative about the kid, right? And this is in a scenario of a school. This plays a role in many scenarios, but we're talking primarily kids for this scenario. For this scenario, we're talking primarily kids. And I want to read to you the language of the Chafetz Chaim inside, and I'm going to translate. Chafetz Chaim says, it's Klal 8 in his rule in Lashon Hara. He breaks it down into Klal. Klal is like a rule. And in each Klal, in each rule, he has different paragraphs, and he breaks it down. It's more than one paragraph per thing. There's Aleph and Beis and Gimel. And so over here, he's talking about who is considered, when you speak about someone, who is that considered that you speak in Lashon Hara about? And therefore, and he says like this. He says, and sometimes, listen to the words very carefully. And sometimes, shaykh, it is possible, isha Lashon Hara afilu ala katan. It's sometimes possible to transgress Lashon Hara even on a katan, even on a youngster, on a child, for example. So he is saying an example, very interesting. It says, "Kagon l'saprik nus ala yasam katan shemegadlen asachem toch beso." You're going to say something negative, constructive, but negative, right, about a yasam, an orphan, right? That's a young orphan that other people are raising him in their house. So let's say you're a foster parent, right? Or you work in a home for orphans, right? One should never know about these things. It's a terrible thing, but unfortunately, it's something that's common. Let's say foster parents, where it's not really a yasam, someone that is an orphan, but someone that can be living in their parents' homes, and they have to, they don't know their parents, so they can't be living in their parents' home. And this kid is unfortunately a troublemaker, which is so understandable with what life has thrown at them. And they're moving to another home, or you're talking about them, and you're going to go ahead and say some negative things. Now, the commentary explained that the reason why he picked a yasam, right, an infant, right, is because it's more likely that there's going to be an outcome of negativity that's going to affect him, right? This is referring to any child, right? But this is primarily an infant. The outcome could be devastating. he could have to be going into an orphanage instead of, or a group home, instead of actually having a loving home that will take care of him. And studies show that kids that are, you don't even need studies for this, it's common sense, kids that are in a home, a healthy home, right, even with all their struggles and their difficulties, tend to be a lot healthier and are better, are able to be part of society on a much greater level than unfortunately someone that is stuck in an orphanage or stuck in a group home or things like that. Now, doesn't mean to say they can't be successful, and they have some very good ones, but it doesn't compare. Right, so if you now say something about, oh yeah, we had that kid, a boy or girl, doesn't make a difference, right? They tend to be a little rough around the edges. They tend to be scream a lot at night or whatever it is, right? So now it might be much harder for these kids to be able to find another home to stay in. So, but it's the same scenario in any child. Now, in our book, they gave a scenario of a school, right, which is, again, is similar kind of dilemma, right? And I want to bring out a point that is unbelievable, and that's why I read it inside. And this is really, if you look at the halacha, this is what they're trying to bring out. The idea of lashon hara, and we're going to see this. The idea of lashon hara, as we mentioned many times, has two components to it. It has a ben adam lemakom, between man and God. God told you not to speak negative about people. That's been between man and God. And every ben adam lechaveiro, between all the mitzvos between man and his fellow, have a component between man and God, because God told you not to do that. And so you always still have to ask forgiveness from God, right? You're not allowed to do it because it is what's it called again? It's in transgression because God told you not to do it. And then there's a component of lashon hara, ben adam lechaveiro, between man and his fellow. Now, when is it prohibited to speak about, or the prohibition of between man and his fellow? And this is something that we'll see in the next couple of days that we're going to learn today, is if the person is harmed. If the person is harmed, and we saw this in the previous stage, if you remember, right? A person is it going to be harmful if the person is known as a person that is technically challenged, or when we spoke about talking about a certain place or a certain pizza shop or things like that. There's over there we were speaking about objects and things like, and every scenario, right, was a different kind of scenario. But the rule of thumb, the thing that is going through the line that's going through all of these cases, and it's something really important to remember. We're talking about a very important rule today, and is that the individual that is being spoken about has to be harmed. There has to be a harm to them, not necessarily just their pride, which is harmful, but actually a outcome of harm because of those words. An outcome of harm because of those words. And therefore, right, that's why I'm stressing, and that's why I read inside the Chavetz Chaim. The Chavetz Chaim stresses out a yasam, an orphan. And the point that I was bringing out, it's not necessarily an orphan, right? But he saw that that's a case where it's more likely that a child will be harmed, because typically, right, a child, right, is not going to be so harmed from the information that is talked about him, right? So because he's going to have a time to grow up, right? What are such of the harm that physical, not emotional, but actual harm that will happen to him, right? A child is not really going to. Most times, things don't affect an adult from what happened to them as a child or what people said to them as a child, right? If we did, then we'll all be needing a lot of help, right? Because I'm sure everybody got a little bullied as a child. Everybody got certain things said to them as a child, right? So the idea is that it has to be that there's a something that's hurt. So now let's look at the halacha and how he says, even though most people would not judge a child harshly because of his immunity, one is still prohibited to speak lashon hara about him or her. Right? Therefore, caution must be taken in the above scenario to assure that what is being said is in fact beneficial for the child, and not detrimental. After all, we can still damage child's perspective by speaking negative about him. right? Jobs prospect, right? The teacher's now going to always be looking out. The kid could change, as he's going to say in a minute. Furthermore, children mature and change in a new school year, right? He or she should have a new chance to prove him or herself, right? So the idea is that there could be a harm over here, because if the way you present it to the teacher and say, oh, such a troublemaker, just keep them in the corner, try to keep them under control, separate these kids. Your tone of voice, the way you're presenting it, is going to come out in a way that the teacher, okay, I'm just going to have to manage this kid. I'm going to be teaching the rest of the class and having that kid under, lock and chain, right? So now this the teacher's whole perspective, the whole way of looking at this kid in this coming new year, right, is lock and chain, right? And the kid could change, or it could be the teacher. We spoke about this also. It could be there wasn't a good, the teacher and the student didn't connect. And there could be a million different things. Now, at the same time, it is possible this is a troubled kid. It is possible that this kid is going to make trouble. So there is a toeles, there is a benefit, right, for the teacher to know. And not only for the teacher, but for the child is a benefit over here also, because for the teacher to know how to handle him or her. Right? But at the same time, it has to be made sure that it's done for the benefit of the child, right? It has to be made sure that it's done for the benefit, right? And I just want to read you the Chavetz Chaim inside stresses this out very, very strongly. He says like this: V'im mechaven b'sipuro l'salek hanizak in sebana deizeh akatam. If in his talk he's here to get rid of the problems that this child has, right? And to educate him in the right way, mutter, then it's permitted. But listen to this warning. Listen to this warning. But he has to make sure that he knows for certain that the story is true, and not to rush through what he heard from other people, right? And also, Chavetz Chaim is talking, and this is so important. And I've seen this happen, unfortunately, so many times, either in schools or even in shul, where people try to discipline children. And I don't want to get off topic, but sometimes, and nothing against adults, right? But sometimes certain adults think that it's incumbent upon them because the kid's in shul, right? Or because it's by a kiddush, which we haven't had in a little while, right? But whatever it is, they feel that it's incumbent upon them to educate or to be the person that's educating the children. Listen to what the Chavetz Chaim says. Listen to this. He has to see the future. Of what's going to be the outcome of his story. Because a lot of times, a lot of times a negative judgment is going to come out from these things. Even when you have good intentions, even when you're doing it because you want to educate the person, you want to help the person, you want to help that kid, want to show them the right way, and you have good intentions. You're not doing it out of frustration or anger or things like that. You are a yashar, a straight person. You're a good person. But, says the Chavetz Chaim, we have to be smart. We have to see the future, right? We have to be able to know, is this really benefit for the kid, right, or not? Is this something that's going to come out to harm the kid later or not? And this is not only with speaking, but actions too. Not to get off topic, but sometimes you don't know what's going on with the kid. The kid might have ADHD, the kid might have other problems or whatever it is. And by you going ahead and trying to discipline the kid or telling the kid what not to do, right, or what they should do or how they should act, could throw off years or months of working with this kid to try to change their behavior. And I'm not saying not to say anything. Go speak to the parents. Go call the parents if it's really being destructive, or go call a teacher or whatever it is, right? But Haros Hanola, seeing the future, especially with kids, is so crucial and important. And that's why I wanted to read it inside. They were saying that right? They're saying that in the English over here, but the way the Chafetz Chaim puts it down in his Hebrew is so powerful. Right? It's so important to realize that, and this is for everything. This is really a rule of thumb for not only for children, but for everything. When you're saying something, right, about the person's pizza, right? The example we gave beforehand. So you're trying to be helpful. Hey, yeah, the pizza wasn't so good, but you have to think about it. What's going to be the outcome of that? And how are other people going to see it? What's going to happen to that person's business? And what kind of person are you? Let people make their decisions themselves. Is it really something that you need to say? Right? Is it really something you need to say? So many times, Rosh know that looking into the future of how the outcome is going to be is so crucial and important, especially with the laws of Lashon Hara. All right, so that's halacha number 1 for today. And this is, again, an important factor that we have to remember, that Lashon Hara is if there's physical harm, right? Regarding Ben Adam L'Makom, and over here, if you have good intentions, you're not doing an Aver Ben Adam L'Makom, right? You have good intentions. You want to help the child out. You want to make sure that the teacher has some information. So that's not a problem Ben Adam L'Makom between man and God. But even if there is no Ben Adam L'Makom between man and God, but if the person's going to get hurt from it, there might be Ben Adam L'Chaveiro between man and his fellow. Right? And that could happen even with a kid, even though kids usually, right, things that don't affect them as much, and the outcome is going to be people don't judge kids as much. But there's definitely scenarios like this one, or the one he spoke about, an orphan, and in many other ones where there could be a harm and something that we have to be wary of. Right? Any questions or comments on this? This is a very important halacha. Okay, let's move on. So let's just take a second before we go to the next halacha, right? I want to explain the quote on the bottom of 83. I don't know if anybody had a chance to read it yet. But it's a very interesting quote. I could just imagine, right? Shimon Bar Yochai said, had I been on Mount Sinai, I would have requested 2 mouths, right? One for Torah and the other for everything else. But I reconsidered, if we cannot stop speaking Lashon Hara with only 1 mouth, certainly not with 2, right? Before we even explain it, can you imagine having 2 mouths, right? Double eating. Oh my gosh, right? What would be with milk and meat? Would there be a prohibition? Can I eat with 1 mouth milk and the other mouth meat? It'll be unbelievable thought, right? Having 2 mouths, right? But let's dig deep for what he's saying. He said, because the point he's trying to bring out, and this is going to get a little hashkafa, right? A little philosophy and insights. And it's encouraging for us to think about what he's saying, because he's saying that the mouth is something that is so pure, so spiritual, that we should just have a mouth for Torah. And let everything else be out of our mouth. Our work, our reading, our secular, which is not a problem, not a prohibition. You have to speak, and you have to, go to work, and you gotta, talk about, other things, or things you don't have to, but things that you're allowed to. Right? He's not saying negative things, but he's trying to bring out a point of our mouth is something that we're using for holiness. Right? A Sefer Torah, right? We don't even have it doesn't even enter our mind to use a Sefer Torah. God forbid, it shouldn't even utter out of my mouth, but just using it as example, right? Lay out the Sefer Torah and make a picnic out of it, right? And use it as a tablecloth. God forbid, can't even imagine something like that. Sefer Torah is a holy object. Forget that. The bima that we put the Sefer Torah on, that has holiness because we put the Sefer Torah. You're not supposed to use it for other things. Right? You're not supposed to eat on it. Not supposed to do other things. Even the synagogue, the Beit Knesset. I'm in the chapel right now. Right? There's laws regarding using the chapel, because since it's designated for prayer and learning, to use it for other things, mundane things. Not supposed to do math. You're not supposed to do business in there. There's a level of kedusha, of holiness, and even in the room that we do prayer and learning. It's not something we do use it for. So this concept that things that we use for holiness, you're not supposed to use for mundane things. And we see this all the time, right? Throughout the lulav and estrog, a lot of people have a custom of burning it in the chametz, right? Because, not the esrog, but the lulav and the hadassim and the aravos. Because since it was used for a mitzvah, right? So therefore, you're not supposed to use it for something mundane or even just throw it in the garbage. And if you can't burn it, so you wrap it up and then you throw it in the garbage to show respect. It's a concept of respect. Concept of things that we do a mitzvah through, things that we use for holiness, not to just use it for mundane. So this is really the depth behind what Rav Shimon Bar Yochai is saying. Our mouths are used for mitzvahs. We pray, we learn, we encourage people. We say divrei Torah, words of Torah. We use our mouth as something of holiness. So how is it that we use our mouth also for mundane things? Forget about prohibited things. And therefore, he said, if I was around, I would have said, hey, let's make two mouths. One mouth for Torah, one mouth for our mundane things. How would that work? I don't know. God would have created it. You know, we have all these sci-fi movies with people with one eye and all these crazy things, right? So I don't know. God will be able to make us realize how to utilize one mouth for one thing and another mouth for another thing. But the point he's bringing out is that we have to realize what our mouth is. And that's what I want to stress about this. If we stop and reflect, what is our mouth? If we stop and realize that our mouth we use for divrei kedusha, things of holiness, things of mitzvahs, like we're doing right now, learning Torah. So then we will stop and think, how can I use it for something that's not pure? I can use it for a mundane thing. So God only gave me one mouth, so I have to. But what is his answer? Why did God give us two mouths? Because look how strong the urge and the desire of lashon hara, that if we had two mouths, he said, certainly we would use both of them for lashon hara. We want to be able to separate it. Even the one that we have only for kedusha, only for holiness, we would use for lashon hara. And therefore, God said, why give you double the trouble? Give you one thing. So there's two important lessons that come out of this statement. Number one, the quote is two important lessons. Number one, right, is that we have to understand the power of our mouth. We have to understand that we use our mouth for something holy, and we shouldn't just let it go for something mundane. And even when we do it for mundane, realize, hey, it's only because we have one mouth. Our mouth is used for something holy. And number two, the answer, look how powerful Rav Shimon Bar Yochai felt that lashon hara is, that even if we had a mouth just for kedusha, just for holiness, we'd probably fall apart, we'd probably fall prey to lashon hara and even use that mouth for lashon hara. And how much more we have to reflect internally and say, I got to work on this, right? I gotta think about this, right? I gotta be aware and make sure that I try not to do lashon hara, right? And that's why I think this quote is so powerful. One more thing from this page I want to bring out, and then we'll move to the next page, and we'll see how much time we have. Is if you look, I'm not going to read through the whole thing. Is that me? Right? Please go ahead and read it. But the Igros Haramban says, right, the second paragraph, he says, instructed us to speak gently to all people at all times. Right? And we quoted this before, but I want to bring out, if you looking within on the side, right? Would you be embarrassed if someone you respected happened to be at the front door, right, able to hear you dealing with tense moments in your home? How would you feel? You're dealing with your kids, dealing with your spouse, on the phone with someone, right? And you know, tense, your voice raises, right? You're talking. Let's hope you don't use foul language, right? That's something that, especially in front of kids, in front of anybody, right? I don't know why it has to be part of people's vocabulary, right? But there's someone that you say, or even someone not even you respect, someone you don't know, you'll be embarrassed. Most people will, especially if someone you respect. So if you imagine that you could be in that scenario at any time, you can imagine that God sees us all the time. That's hard to do. But just think about that. It's possible that if there was someone around that you respected or strangers, right? You control yourself. How much more would you stop to think and control yourself even if that person's not around, he or she or whatever it is not around? Look at the story. This is something that we all could relate to, right? Bonnie, I'll take your question in 1 second. Right? If you look at the story in the paragraph, the third paragraph, right, something that we can all relate to, you go to other people's homes and it seems all nice and dandy and everybody's talking so nicely to each other, right? And they're all respectful and say, oh, please pass me this and please pass me that. And oh, so beautiful, right? It's because there's guests in the house, right? Because I'm not saying they're not that kind of people, but most likely there are tensions, and everybody has some tensions. But we see that when we, in public or whatever it is, and I think I mentioned this, that I gave advice and to a couple in Israel, they were having some trouble and they just couldn't get word endwise because they keep on screaming at each other. So go to a public place and have the discussion. Don't have your discussions in private because you're just going to scream at each other. Right? Go to a public place and then have a discussion. Right? Because then you will at least be able to hear each other because you won't be screaming at each other because you're embarrassed to scream at each other. You'll talk benachas, you'll talk more gently. And then when you talk more gently, you'll be able to hear what each other says. Yes, go ahead, Bonnie. What's your question?
It actually isn't a question. It's just a comment about what Harry said last night. He was talking, I think it's in one of the Parshiot, where he said that there was a conversation between a man and a woman, and that, there was 3 sentences. So they start off talking, and each time, he said, well, why would they repeat it 3 times? Because each time, the one mirrored the other in their tone. So if we are kind to people and speak gently, it is far more likely that they will respond in kind.
Very good.
I thought that was so important.
And he was talking about Judah and Tamar in Parshas Vayeshev. That was 2 weeks ago. That when there's a back and forth with them, it says the same way in the trup, or the way you read it in the Torah has the same trup, the same note. And he's bringing out that we see from there, right, that the way you talk to one person is the way they talk back to you, right? And that's true. And the point we're bringing out is similar, but it's slightly different. That the concept, the idea is that we have to be aware that when that we should act and talk the same way around other people, act and talk the same way we're around people we're comfortable with, our children, our spouse, our coworkers, right? We have to think about that. We have to have that respect, have that tone of voice, right? And realize, and on a deeper level, God is around, right? Not embarrassed in front of God, right? God is around. Okay, let's turn the page. Page 84. Still a couple of minutes left, so let's try to do another day, right? So 84, day 17, and day 18 have a similar idea. And let's combine the two together, okay? Because they're similar concepts. So let's just go through it quickly. Dilemma. You have a friend who has moved away from the neighborhood. You are one of a few people with whom she stayed in touch with. She calls and asks, what happened with the Steinbergs? I heard there's trouble there. You tell her everything you know, including rumors about Mrs. Steinberg's mental health. When you hang up the phone, you feel uneasy. Your words could come back and haunt Mrs. Steinberg. But what can you do about it now? Right? What can you do about it now? So the things like this, right? It's regret. You know you did something wrong. Right? It's not like we spoke about beforehand already regarding in a scenario where you think that's now going to come back and haunt the person. You didn't mean, you're on a plane and things like that, right? Over here, it is possible. This person lived in this neighborhood. It is very possible to come back and haunt them. What can you do? You have regret. Right? So the halacha is to do tshuva for hurting someone. The person must ask forgiveness from the one who he or she has hurt. And however, in a case like the one above, where the information has not yet done harm, we do not approach the victim. Instead, we do our best to stop the information in its tracks, perhaps by telling the listener that it was not accurate. Right? So we're shifting gears a little bit over here now. I'm not saying we're not going to get back to the other. They sort of mix it all over the place to keep us on our toes, right? But we're shifting gears a little bit over here. Is when you did speak lashon hara, it's unfortunately, let's be honest with ourselves, right? At least myself, I'm not perfect, right? Unfortunately, it happens, right? It happens. We speak lashon hara, right? So the question is, what are we supposed to do, right? How do we What are we supposed to do with what happened? So in this scenario, and that's what I'm saying, 17 and 18 are connected, it's slightly different scenarios. In this scenario, you just hung up the phone, right? And unless, that person you were talking to, right, super dials, everybody, or sends out in a mass group, here in Jacksonville, we have a WhatsApp group called Jews and Jacks, right? Or on Facebook groups, and he say, I just heard that Mrs. Steinberg has some mental issues, right? So if that, if you don't think that happened yet, right? So most probably the information hasn't caused the damage yet, right? So therefore, and in the next halacha, we're going to talk about this a little more, right? But again, as I mentioned, this is along the same lines, that since lashon hara between man and his fellow, the component of man and his fellow is when the person is harmed. Between man and God, you have to ask God for forgiveness, right? But regarding the part of man and his fellow is when the person was harmed. So don't go yet asking forgiveness from that person, because we have to try to stop it in its track, and then you might even hurt that person. That's a side point. We'll talk about that, right? But you have to try to stop the information in its tracks. So call that person up. Say, hey, I just got off the phone with you, and I know what I said. I said, listen, I was rambling, right? I was being a yenta, and I'm being honest. I really don't know if it's true. It's probably not true, right? And please do me a favor. Don't repeat it, right? I really, really, really request that you don't. I'll be very upset if you do, right? And I don't want any harm to come out to that person, especially for my words, and especially if I know that it's not even so true. And even if you might know it's true, you're allowed to do a little white lie over here, right, to save that person from hurt, right? By saying, I'm not sure if it's true. It's probably not true. I'm not a doctor. I don't know, right? And things like that, right? To try to stop the information in its track. Because if you're able to stop the information in its track, then you didn't harm that person, and then you didn't do the prohibition between man and his fellow. You don't have to ask God forgiveness, right? Because you still did the ben adam l'chaveiro, ben adam l'makom, between man and God. But you have to try to stop it in its tracks, right? And let's move to the next page, because I want to do these two together. And I told Bonnie we'll finish at 9:30. Bonnie will be like 9:35, right? But if you look at the next page, right, your dear friend Danny has had a hard time finding his marriage match. In talking about his situation with Ali, a friend of yours, right, a mutual acquaintance, you mentioned that Danny seems a little slow. I think was a premature baby, right? Like, what do you know? But okay, maybe he's got a little brain damage, right? The next day, you hear that Danny's latest shidduch, right, was fizzled out, just like that. Worse yet, you discover that the young lady was Ellie's cousin. Should you tell Danny, right? Should you tell Danny what you have done and ask for forgiveness, right? So over here it's a little different. Over here, the damage seems to have been done. You don't know for sure, right? You don't know for sure, but the damage seems to have been done, right? So the question is, right, what do you do, right? Do you go ahead and now ask for forgiveness from the person? So if your words cause damage to another person, you are required to seek that person's forgiveness. This is what we've been saying. Right? Lashon hara, please mute yourself if you're making noise. Right? Don't forget we said lashon hara, right, is ben adam l'chaveiro, to man and his fellow, is when you hurt that person. So here you hurt the person. But however, Yisrael Salanter, right, the father of the Muslim movement who lived in the 1800s, right, Yisrael Salanter is reported to have held that if the victim would suffer more by hearing about your lashon hara, you must refrain from informing him and forfeit that part of tshuva. Don't forget, you really have to ask them. But you have to forfeit that part of tshuva, right? One should ask for a general mechila, general forgiveness at an appropriate time, such as Erev Yom Kippur, right? Or other times, right? Something you said, oh, please forgive me. If I've done anything, I might have, I don't remember, right? Please forgive me, right? So you have to go ahead and forfeit, right? That thing, right? Because you're going to cause another person more harm. And the whole idea of lashon hara is between man and his fellow, and it is because you're hurting that person. So now you're going to go ahead and you're going to hurt that person. Imagine how Danny's going to feel that his friend, right, he went ahead and talked, and you could say, I didn't really mean it. I was just, talking, and of course you're not. And we're just sort of over a beer, and that doesn't help. That doesn't help, right? So it's very important to realize that sometimes when you go ahead and ask that person, you're trying to be a tzaddik, right? You're trying to, I'm going to go ahead and ask that person for forgiveness, right? Because I just want to be clear. I want to clear the room, right? I want to just put everything out on the table. By doing that, sometimes you're going to hurt the person even more, and then you're defeating the whole purpose. Right? So these two halachas are intertwined with each other, as you see. Number one, if you're able to stop the information, right? Because let's be realistic. We're all working on not speaking Lashon Hara, but unfortunately we do, right? So if you're able to stop the information, that's number one. Try to stop the information and don't ask that person for forgiveness, right? And try to stop the information. If the information's out and the damage is already done, right? If you think that it's going to harm the person even more, right? So then you shouldn't ask that person for directly for that thing, right? But try to do it in a more general way. We'll talk later. There's other scenarios of where, of course, you should. It depends on the relationship you have with the person, right? Depends if you're able to fix the damage and do it in other ways. We'll talk about that at a later time. But regarding this point over here, I think the lesson of Yisrael Salanter is extremely important to realize that how far it goes, that the concept of hurting someone else, that you have to forfeit your own ability to ask for forgiveness, because by trying to ask for forgiveness, you might hurt the person even more. So do it in a general way, in other ways, right? And how much more so we have to be aware and think about not to do it in the first place, because you might have to forfeit the ability to ask for forgiveness, right? And hurting someone else. And that's something that is extremely important to think about. Okay, we'll stop here. Just finish with one more quote of the day, and we'll start again. Let's just finish with one quote of the day, page 87. Right, the tongue is the quill of the heart. Right, it's Rabbeinu Bechaya, and it says like this: the tongue is the quill of the heart. We have to understand that when we use our tongue, we are writing things down of the heart. We're either hurting people, or we could empower people. We could inspire people, right? We could, or God forbid, we could hurt people and put people down, right? So our tongue is sort of the quill, right? That of the heart. Okay, just a reminder. Next week. I'm going to be on winter break with my kids, so we're not going to have a class next week. So please spread the word. You don't have to spread the word, but I think most people that are on here are there. So there won't be class next week. But God willing, we will start up again at the beginning of the next year, secular year. And we look forward to that. Wishing everyone a beautiful day.